Gentlemen, we are nearing the end of our voyage here. And as always, if you're interested in joining this conversation or may even hint at perhaps potential future conversations, you can join the Discord server down in the link in the video description. Link should be good for 7 days. And 7 days is, I think, a good standard because after that, some bot may find it and try and sell us Bitcoin. But Mark started mining in 2011, so he's got all the Bitcoin you could possibly want, I'm sure.
I wish.
Oh, sucker born every minute. So today we are finishing up our consideration of Moby Dick, and we start with chapter 132. Chapter 132, apparently at this time of the year, the Pacific Ocean is quite beautiful. And if you're have the good fortune of being in a calm place on a firm boat, you could just sit there and appreciate the beauty. And this beauty even manages to wiggle its way into Ahab. And he forgets, even if just for a moment, that he's on this absurd mission of revenge and begins to contemplate happier things, thinking about his young wife and his young child back in Nantucket. And he seems like he's almost ready to give up the pursuit of the whale. And this, I actually found this particular line here just kind of heartbreaking here. But Ahab's glance was averted like there I went and did it. That probably messed up everything. There's a particular line that I'm going to go find where Ahab gives up on being good, and it's very sad. And so Starbuck, it was in conversation with him and almost convinces him to go back, is not able to prevail ultimately. I'm trying to find where I'm supposed to be.
So interestingly, Starbuck sneaks up on him in a fashion, not deliberately or anything, but like manages to, like, because throughout he's got this preternatural or ability to notice when someone's around, and he just at the moment he loses it, which is kind of important to the scene.
Yeah. So anyway, this is the line. Ahab's glance was averted. Like a blighted fruit tree, he shook and cast his last cindered apple into the soil. So it's just like, oh, so close. So close. But alas.
Indeed. And it is that that contrast between, the quiet, we'll say, of the scene that really is part of the set and setting for this particular chapter, that pivot point, which won't be the last opportunity for a pivot, right? But but it's well done. It's quite well done.
Yeah, I really like, I mean, it just to the point of the contrast, like the imagery that he has here, like the entire first page is just, it's a lot of this kind of alternating back and forth between masculine and feminine imagery. And just kind of going back and forth between like even just different scales of the air, and like, alternating between the royal czar and king, the sun, whereas he had just kind of talked about, and then, like the feminine air, but then it's kind of going up and down and like, alternating as you go up and down the layers. But then, as you get to the end of the chapter, then all of the imagery goes from this bright and sunny and beautiful imagery to, blenched to a corpse's hue with despair, the mate stole away. And then that Ahab goes and looks down into the water and then locks eyes with the reflection of Fidala. So there's a lot of this kind of like looking out, and then now we're looking in, and the imagery inward is just really, it's pale and dark. But yeah, just some of these things, you have, let me see. Well, I like the. Let me see if I can have it here. The circle of singed locks with grew on on the marge of that burnt out crater of his brain is such with describing Ahab's head. Um, but yeah, it's really sad there that and I did think it was funny that Starbuck does manage to sneak up on him, but then there's kind of a thing of like Ahab comes to his senses and doesn't necessarily hear anything. He just kind of like spins around and just goes Starbuck, and starts the conversation, and a very odd conversation as well. The way that he's all of a sudden like really like intimate with Starbuck all of a sudden. Which was odd. And we actually get a confirmation of Ahab's age here. It looks like he's actually 58, which is younger than
58.
he would be. Yeah. Like I thought he would be like mid late 60s or something like that. And then let me see. And then he thinks back about his wife back home. And just this line of rather a widow with her husband alive. I widowed that poor girl when I married her, Starbuck. It's like, oh my goodness, dude, that is really rough.
Yeah, it is rough. I like that you pointed out the contrast between like the masculine and feminine in each alternating paragraph. And yeah, I mean, I thought it was brilliant. Also, I noticed at 132, I mean, we really go into poetry here. Like this is a poetic chapter to the far greater than any previous chapter that we've seen in the book. It's actually quite beautiful and impressive. It is sort of amazing. And I do like too that, from Starbuck's perspective, he seemed to hear in his own true heart the measureless sobbing of that stole out of this center of serenity around, right? So it's something about the serenity around is calling to the true heart and enabling the sight. And it's just like, wow, that's I mean, I don't know about y'all, but that's happened to me. So it's like that's amazing to be able to capture that in text is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's amazing, and just I mean some of these lines, where that all of a sudden, you have Ahab like describing himself and his aging and everything. He says, locks so gray did never grow, but out of some ashes. But do I look very old, so very old, Starbuck? And like he's getting really close and friendly with them all of a sudden. Again, two people who have at this point held the same rifle with intent of killing the other, essentially, and like now we're kind of switching to that. And then this thing of he goes and he elevates extremely highly, looking into a human eye, and says, "This is the magic glass, man. I see my wife and my child in thine eye." And then that is where he like locking eyes with Starbuck. That's where he says, "Lower not when I do. When branded Ahab gives chase to Moby Dick, that hazard shall not be thine," which is a little presumptuous, but. Just but there is that aspect of like he was willing to kill him, and now it's like you stay aboard and like I'm willing to risk everyone else except for you all of a sudden.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it calls back to the divinity that he saw in the wisdom, right? Like, oh, you're a more worthy captain, right? If I'm not around or something, or maybe even if I am. Which was already hinted at in the incident with the rifle, in fact, right? And I didn't, I mean, I never knew where the quote came from. The "Oh, my captain" quote, right? Which is
that's a poem about Abraham Lincoln.
Is it?
Yeah, it's also here,
right?
So,
right.
like, it's worth noting that. But I do believe there's an entire poem about the death of Abraham Lincoln called "Oh Captain, My Captain."
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, no, it's written maybe 15 years apart. So maybe there's a little bit of something there. But yeah,
there's and just this kind of thing where now you're actually getting. For a while, like Ahab wasn't really looking inward. Like there were lots of things that like Starbuck would say, and then Ahab would be like, what's that? Like I should think on that, but actually never mind. And like he's actually doing the thinking here. And interestingly, he does the thinking. I think he does it after the line that you pointed out. Yeah, that like a blighted fruit tree he shook. But then after that, then he goes and he starts saying, what is this? What cozening hidden lord and master and cruel remorseless emperor commands me?
This is the part where he actually starts thinking.
Yeah,
that's what gets him into trouble.
Yeah, right. Exactly. He starts thinking after his last bit of goodness goes away. It's just like, oh, yeah. No, it's.
And then, did you guys see what he did? Yeah, here we go. This might be an important line here. Is Ahab Ahab? Is it I, God, or who that lifts this arm? But if the great sun move not of himself, but is as an errand boy in heaven, nor can one single star revolve, but by some invisible power, how then can this one small heart beat, this one small brain think thoughts, unless God does that beating, does that thinking, does that living, and not I? So all of a sudden, he loses his agency, his perceived agency, and begins saying, "I'm just being moved by God to do this, or some other power that's beyond me. So I can't really actually defy the fate that's been settled for me." When it seemed like just a moment before he was quite capable of defying and just about to go do it, and maybe all this stuff about being fated and being, we'll say, predestined against your will to doing evil. Maybe that's all just a load of nonsense, actually.
Yeah, like he slips into like a sort of quietism to just he winds up just abdicating responsibility at that point.
Mm-hmm. I just did some quick googly things. The poem is 1865. The Moby Dick's 1851.
Mm-hmm.
So it came from here first.
Yeah,
unless it's even earlier. Yeah, Whitman probably read this. I didn't know it was Walt Whitman. That's interesting too.
It's good to have a national poet, right? Somebody who can actually speak into the times. Does anybody know who our poet laureate is right now?
We have a poet laureate?
I know. Yeah, that was my response too. We have one? We don't talk about such things anymore.
Maya Angelou?
And the world is burning. I don't know. Nah.
Wonder if there's any conjunction and coordination between these facts. Never mind it.
Couldn't be.
Oh, that's why I've got.
Yeah, so I wonder if oh Captain, my captain is first from here or not. But it certainly looks that way. It's not the poem. So there you go. He uses it like 3 times too. It's not a one-off.
And then there's just a nice little detail right near the end of the chapter. Ahab had done another basically monologue about how he doesn't have any freedom. And then Starbuck, blanched to a corpse's hue with despair, the mate had stolen away. Just like, we were so close, but he just realized that. And then it was only after that Ahab's eyes get locked with Fidala's. So.
Right.
Yeah, that's that thing, again, that Mark talks about where it seems like there's not that many steps away, but actually there's so many steps away.
Right.
And it's like, yeah.
Right. It seems like he's right there able to grasp, but really he's so far away that it just seemed that way. It wasn't close at all.
I almost wonder if, because you have this thing of Fidala's eyes reflecting, like when he's looking into the water, if like he's seeing some sort of thing, like he's reflecting Starbuck for as long as he's looking at him or something like that. because doesn't like his glance was averted. That's what it said. Right when
Mhm.
he goes crazy again, his glance was averted. So he was reflecting Starbuck's compassion that whole time,
Right.
and now he's reflecting the dark sullen eyes of Fedallah.
Yeah, and that sort of indicates that we'll say if you're prone to possession, that's not a matter of reasoning your way out or even feeling your way out. It's a matter of not being around bad things that will possess you,
Mhm.
which uh, has a whole different attitude on the world. Because right now we see this, this binary idea of the world where people think like, "Oh, well, we can reason them out of it through conversation or some other nonsense. It clearly has never worked in the history of the universe. Or oh no, if they just had compassion is usually the catch-all term for that. Then suddenly they'd be shaken free of. This sort of brings up this third possibility, if you will, that no, some people are just possessed, and if you don't surround them with goodness, uh, they're going to be possessed by badness, and so it's your responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen. Because Fadala is one of the people that was a demon, right?
Mhm.
That sort of or a ghost or something that came aboard,
Mhm.
and so it's really not clear what's driving Ahab directly, right? Because it's happened a few times, right? A few moments where he's not been under the spell of Moby Dick and seen to reason, as it were, although it's not reason. And I think that's what the problem is. It's not actually reason that gets you out of this.
Mhm. Yeah.
Reason taken as deduction. Ratio is a very difficult word to translate in Latin. It's kind of like logos. It's got like 30 different meanings depending on the context. Um,
Yeah.
but there is
It,
an inappropriate proportion between Ahab and the heavens right now. So
and I think especially if people think the whole thing of like the whole possession thing, like you think of giving up sugar, and this aspect of
Yeah.
like, okay, try giving up sugar while you have a bunch of candy and like sugary coffees and stuff like that in the kitchen, and then just pass that every day. But like but
Yep.
knowing is half the battle, right? Like you have the information, so all you got to do is do half the work now. It's that easy. It's
Yeah.
just like good luck, dude.
all right. So we had our little calm before the storm. We had this little bit where Ahab was just about to turn around, and it does not come to anything. Whatever madness, mania, demon has possessed him comes back into full force, and he's not even able to follow his better passions and his even what he actually says it himself that um that against all natural lovings and longings, I so keep pushing and crowding and jamming myself on all the time. Um,
Mm.
yeah, so even his helpful passions aren't able to move him towards the goodness. So we get to chapter 33, the chase, the first day. So apparently we're not going to get this all done in one day.
Mhm.
Otherwise, Herman Melville wouldn't have called it the first day. Um, They Ahab has this sense that the whale is around. Don't ask him how he knows; he just knows. And apparently, a well-seasoned captain can just kind of know. Uh,
Well, some of
and
them
then,
can.
yeah,
Not
yeah,
all of them, right? He's clear about that at least. I'm like,
yeah,
yes, that's the real world. That is
yeah.
true. Some people just have a thing, and whatever that thing is, yeah.
And then he's able to see finally Moby Dick, and I do believe Ahab was the first one to actually see it, so he gets his own gold doubloon. It's like, okay. Do you really need anybody else on this boat? Why don't you just do everything? Um, and then they drop their ships. But as was stated in the previous chapter, Starbuck will be staying on board to man the ship, and they're only sending the three boats after Moby Dick. But when they see him, he's pretty daggone majestic. And that's a yeah. You almost get the sense that like you shouldn't kill anything this awesome, or you shouldn't even attempt. Um,
Right.
uh, so anyway, while they're out there and going after it, the whale sounds, and they're kind of waiting in tension, waiting for the whale to come back. The whale comes up underneath Ahab's boat, and so Ahab very quickly maneuvers to get his boat out of the way, and Moby Dick matches that maneuver and is able to catch these not particularly large boats within his teeth and began to smash it with his teeth. All of the crew has to jump out at that time, and then the other two boats are kind of farther off, and Moby Dick is circling around the wreckage of the boat, and those who are grabbing onto an oar or uh, whatever they can get their hands on. It isn't until the Pequod's able to catch up, get in between Moby Dick and Ahab's boat crew, that Moby Dick decides to go off. And so we've got this sense that Moby Dick is really as deadly as everybody says he is, that he understands all of these whaling tricks and has countermeasures for them. And you don't usually expect, well thought out countermeasures from animals. So, maybe you should pay attention to that. And so they're able to get Moby Dick, or they're able to get Ahab and all of his crew back on the boat. And yeah, they get it up there. I think Ahab has also had his leg damaged again, and so he's got to have a piece of wood instead of a whalebone, because the carpenter, I guess, doesn't have time to fashion another whalebone there. And then there's this particular interaction between Ahab and Stubb. Stubbs looking at the wreck of the boat, and he's just his normal cheerful self. And Ahab rebukes him. What soulless thing is this that laughs before a wreck? And then Stubb tries to get serious, but he's not very good at it. And then, yeah, it's nighttime at this point, and they have to go. Oh, and then Ahab makes this really interesting point. I'll just throw it up real briefly on the screen. Starbuck is Stubb reversed, and Stubb is Starbuck, and ye two are all mankind. And Ahab stands alone among the millions of the people's earth, nor God nor men his neighbors. So, okay, alrighty. I guess that's just how it is, Mr. Ahab, Captain Ahab, and yeah. Ahab, being very generous, says that if anybody else sounds the whale, they can have it again. Uh, I'm not necessarily. He's not really in it for the doubloon, right? But he'll still allow that incentive to drive his men anyway. So that's chapter 133. A lot going on there. A lot of action. Could hardly put this book down while I
Yeah.
was in it.
Well, but also, and interestingly, he offers is it 10 times that amount to the entire crew if anyone spots the whale.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Should be
I didn't
10
remember.
times. So be 10 doubloons divided among 30 hands, which is
Among
a
30
kingly
hands.
sum right there.
Right. Which, interestingly, he has taken the curse, because it's basically a cursed nickel at some point. Can't imagine why I would choose nickel. And spread it to the entire boat.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that might become important later. Now that I've finished the damn book. Finally. Now I can speak with authority about what will come later.
Yeah.
I was just kind of going through just the fact that Ahab just goes full on animalistic at the beginning. It says suddenly thrust out his face fiercely, snuffing up the sea air as a sagacious ship's dog. And it says he declared that a whale must be near. It's just like I don't know,
Hmm.
just that skill. That I mean, it makes sense. You know, you can probably pick up a smell, especially if you spent 40 years at sea, like that type of thing. But it's just the fact that he just goes full on, just shoves his face out and instantly with a whiff picks up the whale is just completely insane. And then there's the bit where they kind of call back and the silent spout that they saw, like several dozen chapters ago. Some of the
In the
mariners,
Atlantic.
yeah,
I think they were
that,
all the way still back in the Atlantic when they first saw the mysterious spout. Gosh,
yeah.
which
Hmm.
chapter was that?
Oh goodness, it had to be like close to in the 30s or 40s or something like that, I think. But yeah, it said in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, and then after that, Ahab points out that that he had earned the doubloon. But and then there's the nice little thing where it says, that Moby Dick is just having a good time, like he's just swimming around, like he's not bothering anybody or anything like that. And then there is kind of like the contrast as well of like he's incredibly ugly under the hump as well too. So it's like all of his scars and everything like that are under the ocean. So as soon as if you just leave him be, he's actually gorgeous. Like this the part that he shows to you, and he's just minding his own business. But as soon as you kind of lower for him, that's immediately when he gets extremely ugly, and he just shows his ugly side. But one of the things that I thought was interesting about his appearance is that it said he revealed two long, crooked rows of white, glistening teeth. So whales of that age probably wouldn't have any of their teeth. And if they did, they would be like chipped and ugly and everything like that. So he's like got top quality dental care, and he's got like the Gary Busey veneers at this point. And it's like I don't know how in the world with the amount of action this whale has that he's got. They're crooked, right? But they're still white and glistening and long rows. And it's just that for a whale is absolutely absurd.
He's a preternatural whale, however. So
Yeah, this is true. And they take care of their teeth, as everyone knows.
they don't need
And
to. They're magic.
yeah, yeah, I wonder because the teeth like socket up. I mean, again, this is but they socket up into the head. So I wonder if like the saliva or whatever solves something. But yeah, and then there's the thing where Ahab he loses his leg again, and then he's like completely exhausted and falls into Stubbs' boat, and it says that he was for a time it was like he had been trodden by herds of elephants. And he's just completely flattened at the bottom of Stubbs' boat. But then it says, but this intensity of his physical prostration did but so much the more abbreviate it. In an instant's compass, great hearts sometimes condense to one deep pang, the sum total of those shallow pains kindly diffused through feebler men's whole lives. It's like you just, it just reminds me of like that honey badger thing where it's like they just get bit by the cobra and they just take like a nap and then just kind of get back up. It's just like we'll just take all the sufferings all at once, and then but that's the thing. Like Ahab's entire life was suffering too. Like he's just the whole thing is miserable.
When it's interesting too, right? Because the whale comes at the boat, and Ahab at the last minute sees the whale coming up. Right? He's the what is he? The size of a mink or something at the bottom, and Ahab sees him coming up from the ocean, and then he basically turns the boat like at the very last minute
Mm.
and saves the boat. But then the whale creates basically a whirlpool around the boat. And that doesn't subside until the Pequod comes to interfere. But also that sets the Pequod in the sights of the whale. Not right away.
Yeah.
And the whale sort of realizes, oh, this isn't a fight between me and Ahab. Which is actually really critical for the next for what comes next. So yeah, it's sort of interesting how the entire tale gets compressed right here at the end of the book. All the mirroring of sort of the past foreshadowing sort of gets, you know, really ultra compressed here. It's really quite impressive.
The simple things you see are all complicated, aren't they?
Hmm.
What do you guys think of that, the Starbuck and Stubb? You know, you've got the kind of grave, serious, very virtuous, you know, you almost get like, for me, Starbuck's kind of the image of the Protestantism that built America. You know, he's a Quaker for Pete's sake. Does it get much more American than that? Maybe Puritans, but and then Stubb is just kind of like the lower, you know, passions and appetites, right? He was the one who wanted the whale steak and wanted the whale steak done just right, and tortured the poor cook until he did whatever with the whale steak. So you've like got, you know, the kind of the more noble and the virtuous, the more base, and ye two are all mankind, and Ahab stands alone among the millions of the peopled earth, nor gods nor men his neighbors. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting part about that to me is, uh, for weird, obviously weird and maybe strange and unknowable reasons, is this contrast of that balance, this sort of binary thinking, if you will. I don't know why that term came up. And then this, and then there's Ahab, right? Sort of outside of that, showing you the world, because he's actually showing you the world. He's saying, no, 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 that's not what it is. It's not this or this, and it's not something in between it, which is all of mankind, right? He's saying there's more, right? And effectively, he's demon possessed. And so, you want meaning crisis? I mean, there it is. Like, that's the whole thing. Once you know the setup for the book, it's like, yeah, it's that third thing, that third aspect, that third perspective, that third way of knowing the world, which is a vertical causality, right? Because Stubb and Starbuck are on the horizontal. They're just extreme ends of the horizontal pole, if you will, of humanity, according to Ishmaelville here. And I think actually that's not too far off. I mean, if there are objections you could have, fair enough. But also in the frame of the book, it's roughly correct to your excellent point, Father. And then along comes Melville, right, with this supernatural affect to him, dragging things down in some sense, but also lifting them up, right? Because he actually lifts Starbuck up, at least in the beginning. Starbuck is, contrasting, because you see the book up until this point as a contrast between Starbuck and Ahab, very much so, right? But then here's Ahab going, no, no, no. The contrast is between Starbuck and Stubb. It's like, oh, well, that's 3 points, not 2. It's like, wait a minute, what's the third point? What's this thing we've been contrasting all along was, and then at this point, and I understand if people haven't yet seen it this way, at this point, the vertical causality becomes evident, right? Because now there's a horizontal contrast, and then there's these vertical contrasts, which are not singular, we'll say, right? Because Ahab goes from highest, my wife, my child, my life, right, all the way back down in an instant. And so it's really 4 points, not 3, because there's a higher in the vertical causality realm. There's a higher and a lower, and then that gets
it's like
contrasted with the 2 in the horizontal plane.
it's like Ahab would be great if he could get this vertical causality, receiving a mission from God business. Like, he would be the best. He would easily be the best if he could get that sorted out. But because he's on top and he himself is not properly ordered towards, say, proper worship of God, let's say,
Right.
that ends up, well, leading to the rest of the book.
And remember the beginning of the book, the other two owner captains see him that way. They don't see him as Starbuck has seen him, with the gun and the threat. They don't see that. They don't see the devilish side. They didn't see the ritual of the doubloon or the ritual of the harpoon, right? Which are both demonic rituals. They don't see that, right? They don't even see the potential for it because they're good, upstanding Puritan or Quaker guys, right? They don't acknowledge it exists. And in some ways, it's a commentary on how the nation got where it got. I mean, it's really prescient nowadays. If people could see it that way, they might notice a lot more about the world. And yeah, it's amazing how much you can describe once you put in those 4 points of contrast instead of trying to use 2 for everything, right? And that third point makes the fourth point shine forth, which I'm fairly sure it was Thunder Bay. Maybe you'll remember, Father, where Jonathan Peugeot talked about that, the whole 3 into 4 thing, where there's 3 things
I
and
have
there's
no
an
recollection of
implied,
this.
yeah, there's an implied 4th thing. We'll have to go back to the Thunder Bay talks and look it up, but I'm fairly sure he did that there. And I thought that was super interesting. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's correct. You don't stop at 3, basically. 3 implies the rest effectively, but you got to get to 3. You can't get stuck in this binary mode of thinking. So I like that because Ishmaelville here seems to really at least deeply intuit this and use it in the literature to switch the frame from this binary being between Ahab and Starbuck all the way out to Starbuck and Stubb, and then using himself explicitly as something outside of that, which is also outside of all humanity, which the level of brilliance in that move, I don't even know what to say about it. I mean, talk about possessed.
Yeah, yeah. And so you don't want to put Fedallah into that scheme, because
He's the
Fedallah
lower
seems to
demon.
be the one that drags him back down all the way to the bottom.
He's the lower demon. Well, one way to look at it is to say that if you're outside of humanity, you could be dragged up, but not by Starbuck because he's not up,
Okay.
right? Or you could be dragged down, and in this case, by a ghost or a demon or a devil or whatever Fedallah is.
There's a lack of the thing to pull Ahab up to the highest.
That's
And
right.
the we'll say perhaps rather worldly virtue, and I got nothing against worldly virtue. We need a lot of it, actually.
Yeah.
But the worldly virtue of Starbuck isn't actually enough. You notice he Starbuck calls on God frequently, but
Yep.
it isn't like his piety isn't enough.
Right.
Like I think a really properly religious man, perhaps at the doubloon, but like you said, the doubloon isn't quite bad enough. Like, hey, we could also get this whale, and I'll give you an extra consideration on top of your 70th lay or whatever. But like by the time you got to ego non baptismo nomine Dei said in nomine Dio Bali, like at that point, I think you would be cleared to shoot him.
Yeah.
Right.
Like at that point, you're probably good. So there isn't, even though he's got like he uses the language of Christian piety, it isn't like into his bones enough to result in good enough action.
Well, and he can, because so think about this. If humanity is stuck on the horizontal, as is stated by Ahab explicitly here, I don't have to go anywhere. Consider, look, this is what's in the book, right? This is literal. What is in the text? I'm listening to too much Peugeot lately, obviously. This is literal. There's no translation necessary. But if that's true, and let's say you're a pious Quaker or relatively pious Quaker, you see someone outside humanity, as stated literally in the text, and then you assume the goodness because like, that's what's outside of humanity. It's not the only thing outside humanity, though, right? You won't see the badness, and that is what we're suffering from. Right? So you
Yeah, I
see it.
wonder. I
Well,
bet you Melville was familiar with the Sunday services of the Quakers, and if you're not familiar with it, they sit around. Perhaps there's a reading, but they'll all sit around in a circle
yeah.
and wait for the Holy Spirit to come and give them a good word to say. And I've
Mhm.
heard this from Quakers itself. It's like, man, the Holy Spirit seems to really enjoy Fox News.
Right. Right. Well, you don't know what's going to come. Right. And the and one way to think about this is that Ishmaelville in the whole text has been signaling all along that we've got guys with skills, right? You know, like Queequeg, for example, like obviously very skilled, high end. Um, it wouldn't be piety, right? But clearly more on the spiritual good side, princely, right? Because he's actually a prince of his nation. Um, but even contrasted to that, Ahab's something special. He is something outside. He's got all these skills, like you can't sneak up on the guy. I mean, even in this last case in the previous chapter, where it seems like Starbuck has snuck up on Ahab, where Ahab hasn't acknowledged him. Ahab knows he's there, and he turns to talk to him immediately. Right? But and Starbuck is the representation of, we'll say, earthly or horizontal goodness in this case. He vanishes when Ahab turns, and Ahab doesn't notice that. Right. That might be a hint, by the way, as to how you can figure this out and how to figure out who to listen to. Because if somebody's seeing, we'll say, an extra natural skill in someone, and they're
You
reading
could say
it as that
preternatural.
person must be good, and that person's not good, and you see the not goodness and they don't, not to listen to them. And you also know what's wrong with them. Like, what they're, oh, I see what you're seeing, and I see why you're misreading it. Because that is actually one of the things we're suffering from right now, all over the place, is people going, well, this guy's got this particular skill, and maybe it's only one skill, worse yet, and they're just applying it everywhere, and and then they're shocked when it doesn't go well, and you see reflections of that, pretty much everywhere, and then people are like shattered, like, oh my goodness, this person, didn't it wasn't the political, you know, uh, shining beacon that we thought, well, they never were, right? They were a businessman. Like, I don't know what to tell you, right? Or they were a technical guy, right? Amazing at tech, and then they get involved in politics, and they touch it, and it just crumbles, right? And it's like, well, yeah, maybe they were this shining beacon, but maybe they're not a good shining beacon, and maybe they're not like as shining as you think. Just just because they can do something that most other people or maybe no other people can do doesn't make it good. That's I mean, we're very much stuck in that world, but that's the binary thinking, this horizontal flat world way of looking at things, that you see something that looks like it's not flat and you go, it must be good. And it's like, oh, I don't know about that, man. There's a
Yeah,
lot,
yeah.
and it could just be possession, and you can be possessed by a lot of things.
Well, I give myself over to the Holy Spirit. So there you have it.
As you should.
As you should, Father.
So something I was kind of thinking about was also this thing of, so you have Stubb and Starbuck as two opposite poles of one thing, as Ahab says, and you have Stubb making a joke about the stove boat, and then you have Starbuck talking about how it's a bad omen. And I'm just kind of thinking, because I really like the point about the captains that are back on shore. because you have the really brash captain that is cursing all the time and making ridiculous statements and everything, and then you have the super pious Quaker guy that's over there, and Stubb and Starbuck are like microcosms of those two guys on the ship, and then
Yep.
you had Flask, who's kind of like just the lower base thing, like he just like whales are just giant rats to be bashed at the sea, like that's just kind of what they are. He doesn't really care about actually anything else, and
That
then
same pattern coming up again with like the carpenter,
right.
who just makes stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
you've got these layers of kind of like the lower things, but then you have the whole aspect of like you have Fedallah who is hidden down in the bowels of the boat. And I mean, it's a big boat, but it's not that big. I think that and people were able to kind of hear that there were people down there, but you have this thing of it's well established before Fedallah shows up that like Flask is kind of like the lowest guy in terms of just like, base instincts and that type of thing. And then he's like drastically outpaced by even like the least of all of the what like he calls them like tiger skin something. Like all of the people as part of Fedallah's crew like immediately are just all of the other layers that go even further down. And then we don't really hear about Flask that much. I mean, we hear about Flask in relation to like Stubb joking around with him and that type of thing. But there is a little bit of that aspect of like now the standard has actually been considerably lower to the point where we're not even talking about these other guys.
Right.
And then you have that kind of contrast too between Ahab, where now he was kind of held between these two pillars or these two poles on land, and there was a certain level of stability that there seemed to be, but now it's like as he's going down further and further, the horizontal plane that Stubb and Starbuck are on it also seems to be kind of relatively lowering as everything else lowers too. And so you're just, but it seems like it's staying in the same place because it's a flat perspective.
Right.
Man, it's a good book, isn't it? Good enough to make Mark actually read. We're going to burn all the books except for Moby Dick and the Bible.
Well, now that we're done with Moby Dick, we can burn it.
Yeah. Yes, Father.
We can move on to chapter 134, the chase, the second day. So Ahab's got a pretty good idea of which way Moby Dick would go, and apparently whales like straight lines. Which, gosh, if only they knew that the shortest distance between 2 points on the surface of a globe was a great circle. But never mind that. And once again, Ahab's got like a real good sense about where Moby Dick's going to be. And Ahab is once again the first one to see him. And Moby Dick was swimming a little bit faster than Ahab was anticipating. So they had to let out the gallant sails. And if I knew more about what ships were, I would know what a gallant sail is. But I think it just means go faster. Anyway, they get into another fierce fight. And almost effortlessly, Moby Dick is able to wreck 2 more boats and then Ahab's boat again. And I was incorrect in the last chapter. This is the one where Ahab loses his leg. And they actually do manage to, Ahab does manage to take out somebody today. It's the Parsi. The Parsi is not on the boat when they're collecting all of the wreckage there. And if I may recall the prophecy from 25 chapters ago, it says that the Parsi is going to go first and be the one to pilot Ahab into death. And so we actually have that prophecy being fulfilled here. But Ahab isn't capable of discerning how these prophecies work. Ahab, like that's the one thing he's really bad at, is he's actually really bad at interpreting prophecies. So maybe that should tell you something. And we do get really close to a mutiny near the end. Starbuck is just about ready to do a mutiny, but he still can't quite pull himself to do it. And I think actually in Starbuck's little speech here, I wonder if this is actually the first time we've heard the name of Jesus
Yeah,
actually
Mm,
invoked, right? Like
pretty
we've heard,
sure.
yeah.
um, but he doesn't seem to have the ability to drive the demon out of him. Um, and if you talk to any exorcist, you have to use the name of Jesus a lot to get rid of a particularly pernicious demon that's in there. It doesn't seem like Starbuck's been given the charism to do that, but he just is not able to stand up to Ahab. Doesn't have it within him, and they go and they spend like the entire night working on more boats to go after Moby Dick. Which, I'm going to be honest, I think they're going to need a bigger boat. So
Yeah, that might be true. Yeah, it actually whales do travel in a straight line on a map, a Mercator projection in particular map. But yeah,
so is a straight line on a Mercator projection actually a great circle? Oh,
or at least close to it. It's yeah,
an
that's right.
approximation of a great circle. Our
Yeah,
planes don't even fly in perfect great circles. So
that's why when you take Greenland and you move it on the map, it shrinks significantly. That's why, because it's following the circle, right? And so
a
when you
Mercator
flatten,
projection is great when you're on an ocean.
yes, it is because we think in flat. There are better ways to do that, by the way. But actually, the old maps, they just didn't account for distance. They just accounted for what you'd meet. So what they did was they warped the. You can see them. They have a bunch of them. They warp the land around a circle. So everybody says they didn't know. It's like, I don't know. They really understood this much better than we do now. They warp the confines of the land around the circle and ignore the distance, which is actually the correct thing to do for navigation because you can write the distance in, Like, which is a much better way to do a map. We don't do that anymore. We have it all the scientific map way with exact measures and measures along the horizontal and the vertical, and that's actually why they didn't think the Vikings could make it to North America, even though they clearly did, right? Because they didn't understand that just because you use longitude and latitude that way doesn't mean other people don't have better ways to navigate that don't follow that measurement system. But it turns out they do, and it's actually much easier as it turns out, and so it's more accessible. And that yeah, that's where everyone's sort of confused. Like everybody makes a big deal about longitude in particular, and it's like, but actually, if you look at the stars coming across the horizon, oops, you can tell exactly where you are on the globe. And you don't even need, like, that's all you need. So, an astrolabe, if you don't know what one is, you should look it up. All of mine have got stolen. Uh, an astrolabe will actually show you exactly where you are with a simple chart. And you just line it up and you know exactly where you are. You don't need anything else. Like you actually don't need anything else. You just look at where the sun rises on the horizon and an astrolabe and tell exactly where you are. You have to wait a while because obviously you use the astrolabe at night. It's the sun and when the sun's out. But that's actually all you need. Everything else is quite irrelevant to navigation.
This was a really long chapter.
Yes.
There was so much in this. I uh, I think this might be the last time that Ishmael has to do like a last hurrah of just praising the Nantucket sailors. Like he just has to go overdone with all the compliments. But when he describes the Ahab being able to kind of reasonably predict where the whale is going to surface again, he says, for such is the wonderful skill, prescience of experience, and invincible confidence acquired by some great natural geniuses among the Nantucket commanders. I just thought, I mean, he had spent so many chapters just going over it, but that's the last time I think that he really digs that one in. And then I was also very entertained on the next page where he describes the mighty iron leviathan of the modern railway. as well. Like I'm never going to be able to unsee trains as whales now, and he's whalified absolutely everything at this point. Um, but yeah.
Well, it's not even Leviathan as whale, right? Because it's Leviathan as such, as concept. Because the so what's happening is, I think probably Vanderbilt. I don't know the timeline on this, but Cornelius Vanderbilt, the one who built the Vanderbilt fortune, everybody else pilfered it, by the way. He was a great admiral, and he basically, like, New York City doesn't exist without Cornelius Vanderbilt. Effectively, that remains a backwater port forever. Effectively, um, he sees the future and takes his entire shipping empire that he builds and plows it into trains. And trains are seen, not incorrectly in some cases, as the destruction of an entire way of life in the United States in particular. Because of the long distances, we need trains more than anybody else. Nobody needs trains like the United States needs trains.
Siberia?
Nobody needs trains like the United States needs trains.
I
Nobody.
guess the United States actually has people to send those trains out to across the vast prairies.
Has
Yeah,
the need for the large amount of shipment
yeah,
from
yeah.
coast to coast.
Because there's nobody in Siberia. Yeah.
Right. And the Siberia just doesn't need that much stuff. You can haul it out on a mule or camels or whatever the hell they're using. Doesn't even matter, right?
Mhm.
But we need to transport large amounts of goods because we have huge tons of ore and coal and all kinds of stuff, right? All kinds of goods that we're making that need to go out right from the coasts to build the middle of the country. Unfortunately, we have a middle of the country, and Father, you know this well. I only know it by transport. The middle of the country is huge and empty, and there's nothing like, if you don't have trains, you're kind of screwed.
Or a river.
But the rivers are going north south.
Right, yeah.
So the river doesn't help.
It's just not surprising where we built the earliest towns. They're all on rivers.
Right. Well, and like, getting to the Great Lakes is a big deal because it connects the coast to the St. Lawrence and to the Mississippi. And that's why, like, the Erie Canal is probably the biggest thing that ever happened in the United States, like, at all. It's so huge because it crosses the Appalachian Mountains. I mean, that's it. It's that simple, right? It gives you a waterway, so you don't have to go all the way up to St. Lawrence and back down to New England. You can go, and that goes to New York, right, from Albany to Buffalo, roughly speaking. But once you're there, you've got the mighty Hudson. So it connects the Hudson and the Erie and Lake Erie. But Lake Erie is the middle of the St. Lawrence and the Mississippi, right? And so that connects a whole bunch of things because now you can get down to the Gulf of the soon-to-be Gulf of America, apparently. God, I hope that happens. I really hope that happens. That would just be so epic. And all the way out to St. Lawrence, which also means that Canada becomes a viable place to live in a civilized fashion, which before this it really kind of wasn't. Sorry, Canada. Not that it is now, of course, but except for the mighty Quebec and Montreal, which are obviously places of unparalleled civilization and awesomeness.
One time.
Only owing to the ethnicities that decided to invigorate them with their resplendence.
Oh man, I'm not sure I can abide such Quebecois love here. So maybe we should move on.
Yeah, well, just the trains, at the same time that they're transporting these goods are also, killing lots of people, destroying lots of jobs, actually, right, and disrupting what is happening in the Midwest with the bison in particular, right? But with the whole idea of things like cattle drives, all of this stuff is interrupted by the Leviathan of the train. So it's actually it's an again, this book is full of excellent social commentary that you're not going to catch unless you're fairly familiar with some of the history around this time period.
Mm. I wanted to tie in as well. We have the now kind of like the collective curse of that nickel that they have on the mast. That now there's this line that says, the wind that made great bellies of their sails and rushed the vessel on by arms invisible and irresistible, this seemed the symbol of that unseen agency which so enslaved them to the race. And they said they were one man, not 30. So just to kind of point out that thing where now they're completely unified in this one cursed thing, which like we already knew, but I just wanted to point out that like this is a continuation of that imagery.
Well, and I think also the fact that he spreads the curse to the crew in that way is the reason why he doesn't, why the mutiny doesn't happen, why all of a sudden the language has changed, and why the unification happens, right? There is this spreading of the curse.
Yeah. And it is interesting because this thing, I mean, we've kind of discussed this a little bit in the language of creation thing about like the laws, like the Mosaic laws, instead of being kind of you're plugging holes in a sinking ship. It's like the fact that you have to have this laws because clearly that it broke in that way. Like we're trying to patch all of these holes and everything like that. And that at that point, like there's so much fracture on the ship that he actually has to spread out the earnings 10 times split among everybody. So it's like every single hole needs to be patched now, with this thing. And then at that point, now they're all kind of reunified with this kind of, false incentive because there has been no proof that he actually has that kind of money. And they haven't actually been pulling in, in enough to probably sell to make that back. So, so he's most likely effectively lied to them. And but I just one thing that I thought was kind of silly here, this imagery, and it's something that eventually I would love to have Sally Joe do, is this thing of the torn, enraged waves he shakes off seem his mane. In some cases, this breaching is his act of defiance. The white whale tossed themselves salmon-like to heaven, and I'm just imagining just the white whale with flowing hair just tossing himself salmon-like to heaven would be something I'd love to see her draw.
I wonder if a Japanese artist wouldn't do a great job with that.
It would be great. Yeah, that would be fantastic. The eyes would be gigantic, but
yeah.
No.
A Japanese artist, not a Japanese degenerate.
But no, I'm saying
what I said.
You got like a chibi Moby Dick with giant hairs, but
artist.
Yeah. Okay. And then I wanted to point out the behavior of Moby Dick too. He's not deliberately trying to actually kill the people. It says he seemed only intent, even having spears being thrown at him, or all of the everything being thrown at him. He seemed only intent on annihilating each separate plank of which those boats were made. So like his vendetta is against wood at this point. Like he's just
or at least against the thing that's chasing him and not the thing that's driving the thing that's chasing him.
Yeah, because when the people get knocked out of the boat, he doesn't chase them. Like he leaves it, even if he passes right by them. Like he's not going and then smacking them with his tail, which he could easily do. Like he's just making sure that they can't get back on the boat and start throwing things at him again.
It's almost like there's a little bit of mercy here, huh?
Yeah.
Not treated, you don't face the full punishment right away. You just get little doses of punishment before the full punishment comes.
Yeah,
and that right there is an incentive. But sometimes we face little doses of God's justice in order to make us turn towards His mercy.
Yeah,
but nothing lasts forever.
You got to course correct with those negative signals.
Yeah.
And I like the imagery here of a slope little flask bobbed up and down like an empty vial, and then Stubb was lustily singing out for someone to ladle him up. It's just so ridiculous. But then they all get back on the deck, and Ahab has lost his leg again, and then he leans against Starbuck and says, "'Tis sweet to lean sometimes, be the leaner who he will." And would old Ahab had leaned oftener than he has. And it's like there's another very brief moment of clarity that maybe he should have actually been leaning on people before he was actually in a position to physically have to do it. But then he
Right.
says, I account no living bone of mine one jot more than me than this dead one that's lost. And then after that, he finds out that his line and his harpoon are gone, which we'll find out about later.
Isn't that interesting? There's this disconnect between him and his own flesh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a good thing that kind of stuff never happens.
Not in the real world, yeah.
Not in the real
Thankfully,
world,
it's only
no.
in literature. Which never reflects reality. It's all fiction. It's all fiction, Father. Whatever that means. I have my questions about what you mean by fiction. Where's that?
And then you got these lines here. He says, Ahab is forever Ahab, man. This whole act's immutably decreed. I am the fate's lieutenant. I act under orders. Ahab's soul is a centipede that moves upon 100 legs.
Perfect guy to
Yeah.
have as a ship captain, right?
Yeah, no, very trustworthy and sane. But and then, the whole thing of 2 days he's floated, tomorrow will be the third. Amen, he'll rise once more. And then he's trying to figure out the prophecy. He says, but he was supposed to go, but still was to be seen again ere I could perish. How's that? He says, there's a riddle now might baffle all the lawyers backed by the ghost of a whole line of judges.
Right. Yeah. The Parsi. Right.
Yeah.
This is the bit I was making about the prophecy.
Yeah.
And how he really sucks at prophecy. Right.
Yeah.
Like it was my jaw nearly hit the floor that chapter many chapters ago where he's like, hemp alone can kill thee. Ha! It means the only way I can die is by being hung. It's like, have you been on your boat? Do you not see all the ropes? But it's this insistence that I'll solve it though, right? It's like, oh boy, the first person you're deceiving is yourself, my friend. You're really bad at the prophecy. That's maybe the thing that you're worst at.
Yeah.
Leave it to somebody who's actually good at it.
Well, it's interesting too because he's the one that suspects someone's missing.
Mm-hmm.
No one else suspects anyone's missing. He's like, round everybody up. I want to see them all. So he's really good at certain things. He's really good at them.
And the Manxman is the one who's actually really good at prophecies. Like no one listens to him. Absolutely nobody. And then just the fact that the broken keel of Ahab's wrecked craft is what his leg is made of.
The keel, why that's what keeps something on a straight course.
Indeed.
All righty. The chase, the third day. The morning of the third day dawns, and they're continuing to go through this. Ahab talks about his spine being his keel, something like that. And then he cries out Moby Dick again, and so they go to it. And lo and behold, when they put their brand new boats down, Ahab sees, kind of to his horror, that the Parsi is basically lashed onto Moby Dick's back. So he got dragged down amid the chaos of all the lines and harpoons that have been thrown in the previous day. Begins to see, oh, this is how you're gonna pilot me down there. You're gonna go first and then come back and show me the way. We don't have any indication that Moby Dick has any ill will towards any member of the Pequod. He seems to be ready to run, and Ahab attacks anyway and gets wrecked. And that boat that's made, there were supposed to be two hearses, right? The first hearse was not made by any man, and it seems that the Parsi got piloted down to his depth on the back of Moby Dick. The second one had to be made out of all American wood, and so that ends up being the Pequod itself. And even though Starbuck's on there, he ends up going down with the rest of the crew. Moby Dick is able to smash a really big hole into the hull of the Pequod. Um, yeah, so the all three of the boats that are in the water and the Pequod are all sunk and drowned at this time. There's a lot in there. We've got the famous lines from "Hell's Heart, I stab at thee." Uh, that one's from Star Trek, if you remember it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course. Oh, that was good, Father.
Yeah, and everybody dies, and it was sad.
Yeah. There's, I mean, gosh, this one too is just so jam packed, as it should be. I mean, Melville didn't disappoint. Like, just everything he was leading up to, I just, I'll save a few thoughts for the epilogue, but I just wanted to point out, you've got also now the extreme contrast again happening, start and end of chapter. You've got, we're in a new made world and made for a summer house to the angels, and this morning, the first of its throwing open to them, a fairer day could not dawn upon that world. And then immediately followed after after that is, here's food for thought. Had Ahab time to think, but Ahab never thinks. He only feels, feels, feels. That's tingling enough for mortal man. To think's audacity. God only has that right and privilege.
Yeah.
Maybe he's
know
actually right. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like the last time he actually makes the correct statement.
Yeah. No, I think actually, yeah, I found that part, quite interesting indeed. Right. Like the idea that we'll say, if we want to be super generous, which I'm not really inclined to be, but it's YouTube, so I'll be nice. A complete and perfect rationality can only belong in one place, and our quest of it may in fact be be the problem when we make that our highest value, we'll say, or something like that. I don't know. Sounds very Age of Gnosis-y. Somebody should do a Substack about that. Yeah.
I would say this thing, I sometimes I like the whole, all the Holy Roman Empire sort of parallels of like the Warhammer 40K stuff. And I remember seeing this one line where it's like, knowledge is power, power corrupts. It was like that. It was pretty fantastic. And of course, it's just the image of this giant warship hovering over a planet that that they've declared war on. It's just like, this is so fantastic. I love it. But then you've got this whole thing that Ahab goes. There's like this whole paragraph where he talks about the wind. He says, "'Tis a noble and heroic thing, the wind. Whoever conquered it? And every fight it has the last and bitterest blow. Run tilting at it, and you run but through it. Ah, a coward wind that strikes stark naked men, but will not stand to receive a single blow. Even Ahab is a braver thing, a nobler thing than that. Would now the wind had a body, but all the things that most exasperate and outrage mortal man, all these things are bodiless, but only bodiless as objects, not as agents. There's a most special, a most cunning, oh, a most malicious difference. And yet I say again, and I swear it now, that there's something all glorious and gracious in the wind." There's just like, he's got so much clarity, but not enough.
Yeah, and there's a Don Quixote reference there too, which is cute.
You've read Don Quixote? Have you?
No.
Okay.
No need indeed.
Yeah.
But tilting windmills is fairly well known trope, so
yeah,
I don't feel like it really makes a lot about these books. I'm like, I don't know, man. I mean, these books are written by people based on their experience in the world. Maybe skip the book step. I don't know. It's always been my attitude about it, so it seems to have worked out really well. So I don't know.
I mean, in terms of usefulness, yeah, but at the same time, like this is based on Melville's experience, and it's been a pretty insane ride. Like Don Quixote is pretty hilarious. It's also crazy, but we have this line. I've oversailed him. How got the start? He's chasing me now, not I him.
Hmm.
And so now you have this kind of thing where he's stayed persistent. And then you have the line from Starbuck where he says, I misdoubt me that I disobey my God in obeying him. And then immediately Ahab gives him an order. and then, aye, sir. And straight away Starbuck did Ahab's bidding. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of that where he's had all these opportunities and he's still going to have at least one more opportunity. And he's just not taking them. And you've got, Ahab is up there and saying, that the look of the sea has not changed a wink since he first saw it as a boy from the sandhills of Nantucket. So there's a little bit of this kind of like sentimentality, but also talking about he starts talking about like the green weather stains and stuff like that on the ship and the difference between natural aging versus like sort of human aging. And yeah, and then he even like Ahab goes to all of this knowing basically that he's going to die. Like he goes with the whole thing leading up to this with a sort of sense of invincibility, and then he's just like, I'm old, shake hands with me, man. Before he gets on the boat. It's just like, yeah, like there's so much of this where he's completely just given up. And then you got just every little omen kind of coming up where it's like the sharks are eating their oars every time they're rowing and stuff, and it's just like every time that they put the oars on the water, and the rowers even say this, like there's less paddle every single time, and it's like
they're slowing down.
Yeah, and there's no coming back either.
Right, it's futile. Right, it's totally futile. And then the boat that's ostensibly could save them gets rammed. And yeah, that's the
and the sharks don't approach the other one, and it says because the tiger yellow barbarians were more musky than the guys on the other ships.
So that's Ishmael's speculation right there.
Yeah,
that's not a scientific fact right there. He's just
yeah. Which of course he immediately backs up with a matter sometimes well known to affect them. Source enough.
He loves to play that game.
Yeah. Oh goodness. Let me see.
I do love the constant contrast right up until the end here with the authority knows nothing and then appeal to authority every single time. That's great. It's really great. We can learn a lot from this book nowadays. I'm just saying.
And then you got the whole thing where, and like Moby Dick is always treated with, maybe not every single time, but most of the time he's treated with heavenly imagery. So even with the aspect of like the connotations of possession that we've had with Ahab, that it says Moby Dick seemed combinedly possessed by all the angels he says that fell from heaven. But so it's like at this point you have it's like, all right, just you have the combination of all of the possession just kind of like clashing together at that point, like, a reciprocal narrowing, if you will.
Yes.
And then that's where the Parsi shows up and is like eyes open, tied to the whale, and like stares right at Ahab, which is a pretty horrific thing to imagine.
Well, maybe they should have just stopped.
Yeah.
They didn't want to see these kinds of horrors.
He had spread the curse to the whole ship.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I've got a book that what is it? Manual for Minor Exorcisms and Deliverance Prayers for Priests. And you could use that to break curses and love potions and all those sorts of things. So the prayers are in the book. I can do them.
Yeah. Boy, I hope you can hold that much spiritual power, Father, to undo the curse of this ship. Good luck.
Unfortunately, I wasn't there.
Yeah, you'd have to do it to like washed up splinters at this point, but the yeah. And then you've got but then he immediately, as soon as he sees the horrifying sight, then he's leading with even more fear on the people on the boat. So he says, the first thing that but offers to jump from this boat I stand in, that thing I harpoon. So it's just like, well, but of course, how are you, it's like, all right, you're going to jump out of the boat, but also like you're musky and the sharks are like eating your oars right now. So it's just like, well, there's not really any options now. Yeah, it says, heed them not, those teeth, but give new rowlocks to your oars.
Yeah, he just yeah, he's definitely already realized like this is whatever end this is the end. And I don't think it's until he sees Parsi and staring at him basically tied by ropes around a whale that he realizes his error in interpretation.
Yeah.
But he had the sense that it was all over, right? He just didn't
Yeah.
he didn't understand how.
Yeah. And then and then we get the very sad sort of like the last thoughts and statements of a few of the crew, and not all of them, of course. So like there's all these different characters that got a bunch of screen time that at this point like you don't hear from Pip again, except for him warning Ahab not to go and like warning him about the sharks before he even gets in, I think. And then like you don't hear from Queequeg again or any of these other guys. You just get like the mates pretty much, and Stubb takes it very well. Like just extremely well. Just this thing of for me, off shoes and jacket to it. Let Stubb die in his drawers. It's just like he's perfectly fine with the entire thing, as was kind of described and foreshadowed way earlier about the thing of that. Stubb treated death as just kind of like, okay, what's next? At that point, he's just there for the adventure. But I mean, even at this point, like Starbuck had the chance because he was told by Ahab to follow kind of loosely behind. Starbuck had the chance to even just kind of knowing like, okay, well, this guy's obviously gonna die out there. Like the sharks are gonna get him before we can even pull in, even if we're following closely. And it's like you could have made some distance, and then like if it actually worked, you can come back, and then like Ahab can yell at you or whatever, but he'll probably be too happy if he succeeded, which obviously he's not going to. But at that point, like he had the chance. He was told that he could basically be the new captain, and like he could have just sailed off at that point and saved everyone except for the hidden crew and Ahab.
Right, but that goes back to the rationality being only for God, and the possession of the crew, which is like we've established the possession's evident. Yeah. They are now all possessed by whatever possesses Ahab by this point, which is why the mutiny didn't happen and why he didn't employ rationality as you suggest and just go off and say do the right thing.
Yeah, there were too many opportunities to do it at that way. It's like not a reverse refinement, but like a vulgarization. It's kind of happened, I guess.
Right.
And so you have that, and then Moby Dick finishes the game by smashing the boat like a beer can on his forehead, and then you've got, and then you have the whole thing that you pointed out, Father Eric, which of course like you knew ahead of time, but I was like, the whole thing of the gallows, like, okay, well, we've already seen in a previous, of course, Ahab didn't hear the story, but the story of like the guys being strung up on the ship, and like they were allowed to come down, but it's like, you can easily have a gallows on the ship as well. But I didn't actually expect, because I've seen lots of stuff of like I haven't actually, until I read this, I didn't bother to actually see like the last scenes or anything like that of the dramatizations that they had, like the TV shows and movies and everything. But I remembered seeing some stuff where there's like, you would see images of Ahab, like he throws the spear and then he's holding onto the rope or something like that. And then like, I thought it might be something where he's just death gripping the rope or something like that. But he actually gets hanged by the rope. Like he goes to stoop down to clear the tied up rope, which Ishmael spent an entire chapter just talking about this, and I never expected that to be, because there's so many random like useless facts more or less that I didn't expect that to be foreshadowing, which was very skillful that he placed it where he did. But the fact that he stoops down to clear the knot, and then
And it's just the rope. So he managed to get the cursed harpoon into Moby Dick.
yeah,
And is this the rope that's attached
Yeah.
to Moby Dick
Yeah.
then? Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So
And
it's by his own hand, basically.
yeah, he did. And Moby Dick is just moving as he would, and then the rope just catches him by the neck, and it says that that he made no sound. He flew out of the boat, and the crew didn't even know he wasn't there anymore.
Yeah.
And it was just like, man, also super anticlimactic at that point, and which of course is saved for the main ship getting completely wrecked. And what did you guys think of this thing of said a skyhawk that tauntingly had followed the main truck downward from its natural home among the stars, pecking at the flag and incommoding Tashtego there.
So Tashtego was tasked with hanging up some kind of another flag on the mast of the Moby Dick, right? Or on the mast of the Pequod.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I get just to make sure I'm understanding this properly, that he's like kind of clinging on the mast and still trying to hang this flag up, even though the ship's going down.
Yeah.
And and the bird gets in the way of the hammer, or did he?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the bird is shrieking, and then the mast finally goes down underneath it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too, right? Because he's equating the boat with a heavenly object, effectively, and then saying basically heaven has fallen. Which I'm like, where did this come from, right? Because I mean, I guess it's the majesty of the ship or something like that has been corrupted and sinks to the depths, roughly speaking. Even though it can't go up, like again, the imagery in this is just it's got to be inspired. There's no other way, right? The imagery is just too good, right? So you have the boat, it's on the water, and then bang, right? And that's yeah. I mean, and maybe it's worth a visual. This is the grease.
Give me a second. Give me a second. I'm gonna highlight your prominence here. There we go.
Yeah. So the boats, the heavenly side of the boat is obviously the top, right? There's your masts. And then it just kind of but it can't go up. Like it can't actually float up. It can only float across and down. That's it. It can float across and it can go down. It can't actually go up. The only heavenly part of the boat really is the top of one of the three masts. So that's all you got. That's actually all you've got. So yeah, I figured that was because this horizontal versus vertical causality thing is at play at the very end with the boat. And again, I mean, this is obviously deliberate at some level, whether it's a conscious level or not, is much harder to work out. Although I suspect it was. I mean, I suspect, if you wanted to put it in these terms, you could say Melville thought more like a medieval than he did a quote modern or age of gnosis is really what he's railing against in this book. If you want to use, we'll say, more accurate, precise terminology, at least as deemed by me. So I'll claim the expertise on that all day long. Modern is just a terrible word. So I think that's why he's doing this heavenly thing, to show you the boat can never rise above the horizontal. It can really only sink beneath the sea, but it is heavenly when it is on top of the sea. Right. And part of that is because of the cooperation it takes to run a boat. Like a boat takes a lot of cooperation to run. Unless it's a very small craft, and very small crafts, we'll say that could go across the ocean are really new and enabled by lots of other technology that requires other people. Like fiberglass is not something you're gonna have been able to have built back then.
Yeah, and his whole captive form folded in the flag of Ahab. So I'm not really sure what this new flag that Tashtigo was prompted to hang up. I don't remember if he described what it looks like, but it's the flag of Ahab. And then the bird gets caught up in the flag and goes down with the ship, which, like Satan, would not sink to hell till she dragged a living part of heaven along with her and
Right.
helmeted herself with it. So,
Right. Again, there's that dragging of heaven down. So a
mhm,
bird can go, quote, up to heaven, right? Or at least more so than a boat can. Right.
mhm,
But it has to take some part of heaven with it. Right. It has to take some part of goodness and drag it to the very depths wherein the fallen angels lie. Because I mean
mhm,
that's basically what again, this is no literary interpretation here. It's the literal text in the book. Um,
mhm.
that's what's in the text, is that's what's actually happening. And so I find that sort of fascinating in a way.
Mm.
And then all collapsed, and the great shroud of the sea rolled on it as it had rolled 5,000 years ago. And only I am escaped alone, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Huh. There's a King James Bible for you. um, so apparently, we got the epilogue here. Uh, Ishmael took the place of the Parsi in that boat, and he was the one who was flung off in one of the early encounters on the third day. And the other ships went to pursue Moby Dick, so he wasn't on the Pequod, and he wasn't associated with the three other boats. He was just kind of floating out there, and he floated out a day and a night. Who else, Mark? Do you know of anybody who spent a day and the night on an open sea after a shipwreck?
I don't know of anybody, but I'm not very
Okay,
well
all righty.
read.
What about you, Castle? Can you think of anybody?
I don't know.
St. Paul, St. Paul. Just
Oh,
another
okay.
biblical reference.
That's right. Because he got shipwrecked like 3 times.
Yeah, and once he spent a day and a night out on the
Okay.
open sea, and I think at that one was where he had to spend a year on Crete.
Mm.
Yeah, and he was picked up by the Rachel that in her retracing search after her missing children only found another orphan.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to note too that so when a ship sinks, if it's sufficiently large, it creates a vortex basically going down, a hole in the water, if you will, that sucks things into it.
Mhm.
And so he does describe like, oh no, things are getting sucked in, and in fact, Ishmael is getting sucked in. But at the last minute, because the hole in the water only lasts so long before other water rushes in to fix it, right? So he's on the outskirts of this sucking in, and he's just far enough out that just when he's about to get sucked down, a bubble comes up from underneath, which is the last hole in a bubble is a hole in the water, effectively, right? The last hole in the water is now filled, and then up comes the coffin
That's right. Yeah, important detail.
that was made for
Queequeg's
Queequeg,
coffin. Yeah.
right? Queequeg's coffin.
Yeah, so he's literally like riding on the last breath of the Pequod at that point.
He's riding on the last breath of the Pequod, and that last breath, through some small miracle, right, by any account, is the
The
thing
life
that
buoy.
was substituted for the thing that's supposed to save you, but
Mhm.
was also a coffin, or was originally a coffin. And
Yeah.
then he floats in the coffin, which it's fascinating, right? And is of course captured by the ship that is searching for its people,
Mm.
which somehow caught up with the whale, which is even more interesting. At some level, it's like, oh, you actually did almost catch up with Moby Dick in your search, and yet your people are still gone.
I think too, I just, of course, it was it was a combination of Providence and Ishmael's incompetence that saved him, right? Because he was on the boat and he was the one guy, while there's sharks snapping all around and everything like that, he's the one guy that slips out of the boat. And
But
so
he
it's
got
like,
knocked out of the boat. It wasn't his fault.
I mean, so he would say, but yeah, he just, whatever the case, he falls out far enough and then is, of course, left behind without a second thought. And he's out there, and like that distance was just enough for him to stay away from it. And then it says that that the entire time that he was on the coffin, says the unharming sharks, they glided by as if with padlocks on their mouths, and the savage seahawks sailed with sheathed beaks.
Right, which really sort of begs the question is of what is the role of greed in the story, because it seems like the curse that got spread to the whole rest of the ship did not get conveyed to Ishmael, and that's why the sharks aren't going after him. That's why he survives this whole thing. And he gets the call. He gets pulled in, but not far enough, and then the coffin comes up, and it's a weird set of events. But it's almost like because he's perfectly happy, living in rags.
Well, it's another thing, right? The very last word of this story is orphan, and the very first sentence gives us, "Call me Ishmael." Ishmael was essentially orphaned by his patriarch in the biblical story. Now that the son of the promise had been born, he didn't need the son of the slave girl, and so he kind of exists, outside of his father's house. He gets driven off. He still has angelic protection and the providence of God smiling upon him, but he's not really a part of the biblical story at all after about Genesis chapter 32, when his grandchildren go and carry one of his great nephews off to slavery in Egypt. So that's an interesting thing. But because he's kind of on the outside of the main, but he's an outsider to the Pequod itself, right? He's just the eternal wanderer, the eternal
True.
outsider. So when the Pequod goes down, he's best equipped to actually survive that, because he was never all that tied into the Pequod anyway.
Right.
Being on the edge of it.
Well, he's also, again, he's not caught up in the frenzy of the hunt for the whale. He's very much a neutral observer in that way, even though he's obviously not a reliable neutral observer. He's not a reliable narrator, that's for sure. But he is in fact neutral in that way. And I just want to point out, I forgot to point this out at the beginning. So on January 6th of this very year, 2025, they did the annual reading at the in New Bedford Whaling Museum of Moby Dick, the 25-hour reading.
Holy mackerel! That's an undertaking right there.
Yeah, they do it every year, I guess. But yeah, people come from all around the world to witness this event. But also, 25 hours sitting at the museum, and beautiful museum. There's a picture of them at the scale model boat I told you about earlier. And everyone's around there. Some people are in the gallery, some people are on the floor around the boat. And they have different people come up and do sections of reading.
That sounds fun.
And now we're finishing just after that.
Yeah.
Not quite on the octave day of the Epiphany, but we're close. So within the octave of the Epiphany. Sorry, that's what January 6th, like a lot of people, they think about some kind of maybe a bit of disorder, public disorder. I always think about the Feast of the Epiphany on January 6th. So it's interesting that they do it on January 6th. I wonder what their thought process is in doing it that way.
Who knows?
I just wanted to point out something about just to kind of add about Ishmael not really being invested, that he literally talks about, because they had the whole thing where in order to win the doubloon, you had to actually be up and like spot the whale and like your best
Right.
chance of that was to be up there. And he spends an entire chapter talking about how he cared so little about that. I mean, about any job really, but about especially that job because you put him up there and then he's completely just stuck in his head. And that
Yep.
there were probably chances that he may have actually even had the chance to see it at that point because with the callbacks of like, well, in the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans, they might have actually seen that spout. But if he was up there, like he might have actually just glazed over it while he was thinking of something else. You know, it's just like, and that would have actually saved everyone's lives as well, at least for the time being, if this was inevitable.
Yeah,
Interesting.
if he's not sharing in the evil intention, gives at best indirect material cooperation with evil. Uh,
It's hard to it's hard to know how tied in he is, and that's why he survives because he's just not tied into to what's going on very well. And I find it all fascinating, all the different symbolic representations, and the way they're played with. Like it's it's really a remarkable text at some point. So
well, I'm glad you came along with me for it, and it seems to have been. I've certainly felt this. Look forward to this. You guys brought me new insights every time we've cracked the book open, and in the times that I had read it, I had done sections of it in my American literature class, and that's where kind of the big framework of the book. And I think one or two other times I'd read through it myself, but felt like I was missing a lot of it. And this time, I felt like I got a lot more out of the book than I ever have. Even with my very good literature teacher, we were just rather constrained by time, and well, with these live streams, we're rather unconstrained by time, and just it's been delightful to waste time with you gentlemen. So,
I
and
agree.
anybody else who's joined us along the way.
yeah. Well, look, thank you, Father, because I would never have read this on my own. So, and I'm glad I didn't, because reading
Yeah.
a book like this on your own, it's a major error. Major error. You will not understand most of this book if you read it by yourself. You have no chance,
Yeah.
none whatsoever. IQ aside, like it's not going to help you. Especially being as poorly read as I am on a certain book. Never remember the name of that book. If only it had a reasonably long title and an actual author associated with it, I think that would do better for sure. But who knows? Bad
But,
marketing. Bad marketing.
but yeah, thank you for the invitation on this one. I've had a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to whatever comes next that isn't 600 plus pages.
Well,
Uh,
I'm thinking we might just need to change genres entirely and go for some short stories.
please.
And like
Yes,
maybe a short story a month, that'd be uh,
that'd be great. That's my
and I'm
area of
thinking,
expertise more so is short stories.
yeah,
With my reading deficit, I'm way more well read with short stories, let me tell you.
maybe we should switch gears a little bit and have a bit more of a feminine presence in there. So my proposition is we're gonna maybe retool the Discord server to be a place where we can discuss Flannery O'Connor short stories, at least for the time being. But we'll keep it with American authors because we're a bunch of patriots here.
Excellent.
The,
I
uh, the,
love the
the,
idea.
the
So to
Moby
anybody who's
O'Connor
made it this
Discord server.
far, thank you. And I think I'll retool the book server, the Discord server, to be the Father Eric Book Club server, which is I think what we're basically doing here. So anyway, we're pulling back into port. We're going to take stock of everything that we've lost and everything that we've gained on this journey, and maybe we've got some valuable cargo that we've brought in to the folks on shore. But yeah, thanks for coming on the voyage with me, and God bless you guys.